thank you very much indeed for coming to this session on anti-bullying and what we should do about bullying, how we define bullying, how bullying in schools relates to other ideas in wider culture about bullying, and what's the best thing to do. So an article in Psychology Today last year said that at least 95% of teenagers are potential targets for bullying. In January, the government announced funding for schools to run new programmes in perseverance, grit and resilience as part of its resurrection of a much older debate about teaching character in schools, the idea that schools' job is to mould children's character. And the language of bullying, microaggressions and harassment is increasing in universities and workplaces as well as schools. So it's a really hot topic. There's been more than a six-fold increase over the past 10 years in peer-reviewed research about bullying and what we should do about it, and a proliferation of anti-bullying initiatives and guidance that cover cyberbullying, sexist bullying, homophobic and transphobic bullying, amongst others. So, lots of questions to think about. I'm Catherine Eccleston from the University of Sheffield. I'm obviously chairing this panel. That's why I've started the opening. And we have a really excellent panel to think through some of the questions that this preoccupation with bullying raises for us. And I'm going to introduce them, as we do in all these debates, in the order in which they will speak. So firstly, on my right, Keith Sullivan recently retired as a statutory professor of education for the National University of Ireland. He's carried out research into bullying in the school, university and workplace setting, and his first book on bullying, The Anti-Bullying Handbook, published by Oxford University Press in 2000, was nominated for New Zealand's Montana Book Awards. So that's Keith. The second person to speak, on my left, is Dr. Helena Goldberg, co-founder and director of Spiked, the first custom-built online current affairs publication in the UK. Helena has been a primary school teacher and did her doctorate in developmental psychology. She teaches undergraduate and postgraduate courses in developmental psychology, both here and in America. She's author of Reclaiming Childhood, Freedom and Play in an Age of Fear, and Just Another Ape. And then lastly, to my right, Mike Bolton is Professor of Psychology at the University of Chester and researches the links between children's relationships and well-being. His work on bullying has been cited widely in numerous policy documents by governments and NGOs, and he is the founder and editor of a new online journal, Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychology for Practitioners, that has numerous articles on bullying-related issues. I think most of you do know the format. My speakers have been asked to speak for absolute maximum of 7 minutes, and then we're going to go straight out to the audience. Collections of 4 or 5 questions. The panel does not have to answer every single question. It's not bullying you if your question is completely ignored and overlooked and doesn't even seem to register. But your questions, of course, help the audience and us think about some of the issues that this topic raises. So, Keith, please.
Thank you, Catherine. I've been involved with bullying research and finding solutions to bullying for a long number of years. My books and publications have been published in paper, electronically, in English, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, and Estonian. The Estonian one's particularly interesting. But the question is, do anti-bullying policies build character? That's the main focus. And my answer to this is yes and no. It's only one element in the issue of bullying and how you deal with it, how you address it effectively. And I've been mostly involved in universities for my working life, but I actually have been a teacher and a guidance counsellor. I taught secondary school in Canada and England, and I was a guidance counsellor in New Zealand. And I've not lived in the UK for many years, but I've had ongoing contact, and I'm very interested in the issue. So I might not get the target exactly right when I respond to it, and you're welcome to challenge me on that. But I identified things in my past, in my being here, that I thought were of particular interest when I did them, and of concern as well. At 24 years old, I was in a rock and roll band, and I was in the north of England, and I had friends in Durham, and I ran out of money. I was also looking to do a PhD in England, and so I had to get a job, And I was offered a job as the head of geography at Tiddo Grange Secondary Modern School. And it was in the era of Margaret Thatcher when she was Minister of Education. And poor old Margaret, we mustn't talk too badly of the dead, but her ethos, is there no such thing as society, only selfish individuals, has been very damaging, I think, in all kinds of ways, particularly in education. And they used to call her Margaret Thatcher Milk Snatcher in those days because she stopped the milk that people got in schools. And of course, Tony Blair has done nothing to help things. He's kind of decimated Labour and continued the job that Margaret Thatcher started, really. And so I think in many ways the ethos of managerialism has meant that the foundations of schools, in which you actually look after children, you look after all of their needs, you educate them, but you also teach them to become persons in the world, along with what happens at home as well. So I'm just going to state a few instances from my English experience. So when I was teaching at Tiddo Grange, I took over from the head of geography. He was a man who had a nervous breakdown because the class that he taught and the other classes were so tough, so difficult. And when I got there, the school were very, very dismissive of the kids in these classes. And I was teaching the lower fourth, and it was the worst class in the school. And what I did was, I was a young man in those days, and I wasn't, I knew how it worked for people in situations of conflict, and I took them on, probably in a way that you wouldn't be able to do these days. And we actually kind of came to some kind of working relationship, and I found out that people who were actually dismissed by the teachers as being, no hope, as troublemakers, going to end up in jail, I found them to have lots of ability that was hidden, that hadn't been brought out in the education system. So in effect, there was this one particular boy, he was 13, he was 6'4", and they said, oh, he's going to end up in jail, he's the worst kid in the school. And what he was doing at home was people were bringing their animals to him that were damaged, and he was fixing them. And he had lots of ability, but the school didn't see it, and they didn't see it in these other kids as well. So in effect, what was happening here was the teachers were actually quite depressed themselves. It wasn't a good time for them economically, etc. But they were actually coming to conclusions. They were actually bullying these children who kind of gave it back to them, but it wasn't really a very good approach to education. I came back to England because I wanted to get an education qualification in the area of psychology, and I did an MPhil at Cambridge. And what I did was I was working with children in Haringey in the early childhood area. And what I found to be the case, I was dealing with children who were working class children, middle class children, and black working class children. There were no black middle class children. And what I found was it was preschool, it was pre-reading, and these children the middle class kids were doing much better because the whole ethos of the school, the language of the school was geared towards them. The working class kids did not as well, and the black children did very, very poorly. So in effect, what was happening was these children, the black working class, the white working class kids were actually not being attended to, their needs weren't being met, and they were being set up for failure. And I would think that when you actually are in a situation like that, when the school's not doing you any good, then in fact you're setting up kids who are going to get very angry, and they could be bullied, or they could be, they could do bullying as a result of it. So looking at those situations, you actually have a context, you have a chemistry for failure and actually for creating a climate of bullying. The teachers were really nice teachers, but they weren't aware of these basic needs. They hadn't been prepared for it educationally. They didn't see it because they had so many things going on. So in effect, the school in both of those situations were actually creating a situation where bullying could happen very easily, and lots of other negative things as well. The other thing to mention with my English experience, I was appointed to the Charter Fellowship in Human Rights at Wolfson College in Oxford, and I went around and I met all of the people who were working in bullying at the time, and I found some people who were working in bullying were just getting a hold of it and starting to find solutions. But I found a group up in Dundee, and these people were doing really good stuff with kids. They were kind of social workers rather than teachers. I have colleagues who are working in Hackney in a really difficult school. They love the kids, they love the context, but in fact, Ofsted is saying, you're not doing very well academically to the school. and the schools running around trying to meet this need that Ofsted see. And in fact, the greater need is to actually create an atmosphere where children can learn. So my final point is that in my first book, what I identified was something called social ecology, which just means that, in fact, when you deal with a school situation, you need to actually look at the whole picture. You need to see what's going on in your school, and you need to create an atmosphere that, like ecology, allows all children to grow. And it's very, very, schools are very chaotic places. The kids change each year, the teachers change to some extent each year. But in fact, if you have a good management process, and I know management's a bit of a dirty word now, and the idea of social ecology is that you actually work on an ongoing basis in creating a school that looks at all of the issues, including bullying, to actually find how to do things in a correct way so that you actually give people academic opportunity and you actually deal effectively and you anticipate, because you've learned how it works, all of the things that are going to happen and deal with them effectively.
Thank you very much. Helena.
Okay, well, my answer to the question, do anti-bullying policies build character, is unequivocally no. I think they're more likely to do the opposite. They're more likely to make the next generation a lot more thin-skinned than thick-skinned. But my argument is not that no good can come of any aspect of anti-bullying interventions or policies. I'm sure some good can come of them, but I think on the whole, they do more harm than good. And I have many, many concerns about anti-bullying policies, but I want to focus on two things today. And that's two aspects of the message which I find really problematic, the message that's put across. One is that if you feel really upset or hurt, it is because somebody else has done something to you. So rather than you having any responsibility for not feeling good in the particular situation, it's because somebody's done something to you. Another part of the message I think is problematic is that if you're experiencing difficult emotions, that is problematic and damaging. And the term that you hear again and again and again in anti-bullying awareness campaigns is scar you for life. It scarred me for life. And that's a message that's often put forward. So on the first point, if you feel upset, you see it written, if you feel upset, hurt, humiliated, useless, anxious, it's not your fault. You've done nothing wrong. You don't deserve to feel the way that you do. And in some cases, yes, that might be true. But in very many cases, the person who's in emotional turmoil may be a result of the way that they're behaving, or it may be that they're misinterpreting the situation. They're interpreting other people's emotions and gestures the wrong way. And I'm not saying this because I have been accused of all sorts, and the B word comes up a lot whenever I talk or write about bullying. But I'm not saying this from a standpoint of callous disregard for those who are more vulnerable, more sensitive, maybe more anxious or more socially awkward than others. I think partly why I've taken up the issue of bullying is because I do feel such an affinity to those children, because I was that child. I was exceptionally thin-skinned as a child, very easily humiliated and mortified. And, you know, the things that I would dwell on for days and days, and even as a teenager, I am so glad that there wasn't an obsession with bullying when I grew up, because I would not have had to fight so hard to overcome all of my anxieties and all of my fears. And as a child, I would never have dreamt that I would sit in front of a panel of people and speak, because any attention, negative or positive, I find very difficult to deal with. So, you know, I had to learn to laugh at myself, and I was a very slow developer in that regard. But I think if you cannot laugh at yourself, life, and I know it, life can be really quite miserable. So I think we do the wrong thing if a child is laughed at and is upset, if we go along and say, you're a bully, you're a victim in that situation. It's the wrong way of dealing with it. And I think there's, without a doubt, a lot of pressure on adults to label situations as bullying, rather than say, oh, come on, you know, sticks and stones and all that, or you're being too sensitive here. It doesn't mean that adults should never intervene and try and stop a situation where a child is being picked on. But I think the pendulum has swung far too much in the direction of intervene. And many adults say to me they do intervene to cover their own backs, and that's just wrong. Because, you know, they have to follow the anti-bullying policy. Not because they think it's the right thing to do, but they're covering their own backs. On the second aspect of the message that I find really problematic is this idea if you experience negative emotions, that's damaging. And the concept of bullying has expanded, I would argue, to include everything that's slightly unpleasant. And it's presented as scarring children for life. And, you know, life is not a bed of roses. We are going to feel deeply unhappy at times. We are going to feel really hurt by what somebody else does at times. I think human beings do hurt each other, but I would not draw the conclusion that hell is other people. Not that I quite know what Sartre meant by that, but I would argue that actually we should take comfort from the fact that we can so deeply hurt each other because it shows how much we mean to each other. And I think true intimacy and friendship, you cannot reach that sphere of true intimacy and friendship without experiencing betrayal, jealousy, shame, unhappiness, anger. I mean, it's bound to include misunderstandings, you know, rough edges, testing of boundaries. And so, in a sense, it's a positive thing, experiencing those emotions. And that's why I think anti-bullying policies and guidelines are problematic, because it presents those emotions as problematic and something that needs to be eradicated. And most often it does not. I think children need to learn to deal with emotional pain. It's difficult as adults. I do think it's incredibly difficult as adults not to intervene and let children feel that emotional pain. But I think, you know, a lot of the time for human beings, that heartache is definitely worth it, and it brings us closer to other people. And that intimacy and closeness is central to our lives. What gives us life meanings is what helps us define who we are. And then we shouldn't put anything in the way of humans reaching that intimacy. So very quick last point, but might have to come back to this later. Because one of the things that's raised in the blurb is it possible to teach children resilience? I would argue schools shouldn't try and teach children resilience. You cannot teach it formally. There's not an ABC of how to become resilient. You become resilient through facing and negotiating challenges and through experiencing, being exposed to and experiencing a whole range of emotions, including jealousy and envy and shame and humiliation and anger and disappointment, anxiety, dread, fear even. That's how you become resilient, and developing thicker skin by actually being exposed to difficult emotions. So I think we need, on the message, scar you for life. Don't say that to children. If you say to children, you can put this behind me, behind you, they've got a chance of putting those experiences behind them. If you say this will scar you for life, then it may well scar them for life.
And finally, Mike.
Thank you very much. Well, it was almost 30 years to the day, actually, where I observed firsthand my first incidents of bullying. I was doing my PhD in the north of England, and I was carrying out a series of observational studies in schools. And I saw a boy do something that I thought was part of normal growing up. I saw him tease another boy. And in the course of my research, which actually took place over about a whole school year, whenever I saw these two boys interact, there was more of the same. There was always somebody taking on the role of a perpetrator and always someone taking on the role of a victim. Now, the term bullying wasn't in common usage then. I kind of suspected something was wrong, and I mentioned it to my supervisor, and he recommended that I had a word with the school staff, which I did. And they said, oh, this is just part of growing up. There's no physical assault going on, which actually wasn't true because I'd witnessed that and reported it. But it was kind of downplayed as being not that important by the school staff at that particular time. I now know this actually meets all of the criteria for bullying. And along the way, along my journey of researching bullying over the past 30 years, I've seen many cases where there's been very little physical contact, but I feel sure anyway, that there was some personal scarring going on. So very quickly, another incident that I witnessed firsthand was a group of 14-year-old high school girls had decided for one reason or another, I never got to the bottom of that they didn't like a particular girl within their cohort, another 14-year-old. But things seemed to change one day because they decided they were going to befriend this individual, and they spent a fair amount of time with her over a number of days and weeks. And they suggested that to kind of celebrate this kind of coming together of the otherwise disparate individual and group, that they would encourage this girl to have a party at her house on a Saturday night. And what they did was they encouraged the individual to make this a really special event. So food and drink was provided, mum and dad were encouraged to go out, and this was the talk of the town, as it were, for a while. And then come the night, you may anticipate what happened, but nobody showed up. It was all an elaborate hoax. So again, it was very difficult when we made the school staff and parents aware of what had actually happened, for them to actually know what to do. There was no physical contact, which at the time would break the law. So maybe in this particular case, I know it's an extreme case, but at the time, we didn't know how extreme it was. So just a couple of anecdotes there that do reflect how sometimes in certain circumstances, bullying might scare individuals for life. And there are documented cases of individuals taking their own lives because of bullying. Certainly bullying has been a factor in the notes left behind by young people. Fortunately, they're relatively few, but one is too many. But I think at this point we do need some audience participation. So if you wouldn't mind, indulge me in this, if you could turn to your partner or turn to somebody sitting next to you and withdraw your fist as if you're about to deliver a punch. Would you indulge me in this? It doesn't matter if there's nobody here, if you're sitting at the end. You can repeat this exercise in work or in school. Don't do anything yet. You might want to get the middle finger raised. And on my signal, I want you to deliver a sharp blow to any part of that person's anatomy. Face is quite good. So I'm going to count down from 3, and when I get to 1, you can deliver that punch. Okay? You can look them in the eye. That actually helps here. Some, psychological rapport helps. So we've got a 3. I can't see many fists, despite the lights. We have a 2. No, we can't do this. It's ridiculous. It would be seen as totally unacceptable. Okay, let's try something else. Maybe not quite so extreme, because physical assaults are against the law. Turn to the person sitting next to you, and think of a really bad insult. Think of something that is really going to personally insult the individual. The C word is a good one. Read into that what you want. Maybe to do with their gender, their ethnicity, their background. Okay, and I'll count down from 3, and on 1 you can deliver that verbal insult. Now clearly you're not going to do it. Okay, let's lessen the ante even more. What I want you to do is pick somebody from your, work or social life and collude and collaborate with other members of your social group to decide you're going to leave that person out, deliberately leave them out. Okay? And, either do this really or as a thought experiment. Imagine you're on the receiving end of this kind of action. Now, these are things, unfortunately, these are behaviours that are going on daily for many young people within schools. Okay, and we have to ask this really important question, is this building character? It begs the question, what do we mean by character? What is characterful about experiencing these things? And I agree with Helena in terms of we need a balanced approach here. Clearly, this is a continuum of things that are acceptable on the one hand and totally unacceptable on the other. And one of the key issues I think we're still grappling with after 3 or more decades is where do we draw the line? What I would say is that adults are not going to solve this problem. If we If we were going to solve it, we would have solved it by now. What we need is young people to be involved. We need to work with young people to help them become resilient in the face of this kind of continuum of behaviour. We need to work with young people to ask questions about why would they engage in this kind of behaviour. But in terms of a top-down solution from adults imposing something within schools in terms of anti-bullying policies and practices, we failed. We are now, in 2015, in a position that requires urgent action rather than is the result of effective action over the past 3 decades.
Okay, well, of course, as a chair, I've got about 400 questions, but I'm not going to obviously ask them. But I've just been in a session on rape culture, which was incredibly heated and very divided. And I spent the entire hour and a half, and I'm no wiser at the end of that discussion about what is rape, because the idea is we live in a rape culture. And I have to confess that I'm still in a slight same position with bullying. I don't really know yet. I mean, it'll come out perhaps in the wash and from the panel as they respond. But none of the panel have really defined for me what bullying is. So we have on the one hand quite apocryphal, very serious cases that we could all say that's probably completely unacceptable. But then a quick conflation into really quite a lot of other things. So I must admit I am confused about what bullying is, and I don't know what weird anti-bullying. I don't yet quite know what that actually means, but that's just me, and that's probably just my problem. But we'll see how the audience responds.
Hi. As a teacher, I think one of the difficult things is the confused information that comes into schools. Whether it's about social emotional kind of learning, whether it's about whatever character is supposed to be and definitions of grit and perseverance and all these sorts of things. Does the panel feel that part of the problems in schools is this sort of confused amateur psychotherapy that teachers are supposed to take on?
Well, I think bullying is on a continuum, and it turns into bullying when it gets really serious and you see severe consequences. But I think that the children are born resilient, and I think as adults we can help teach them to understand that their reactions to what's happened to them are their responsibilities, and teach them and teach them coping skills so that they have strategies how to respond to these types of events. Because as they learn through these experiences, that might be the definition of growing resilient and understanding how to deal with situations that will come up throughout their lives. And I want to know if you think that this is a strategy that might be more effective than some of these other bullying programs that are out there.
Hi. So as someone that has been the 14-year-old girl that did get excluded by another group of 14-year-old girls that didn't like her, and has now come through and I think quite an emotionally mature person and learned from my situation, I kind of have to agree more with this side of the table that I feel anti-bullying, it doesn't disadvantage people that massively, but it kind of pinholes people in an experience where you're supposed to come through your teenage years and emotionally develop yourself. I think it's quite a personal thing to evolve emotionally and understand where you're coming from and start to become more self-aware and assess your own kind of psyche. I think the stress on bullying currently in schools kind of places a group of people in a victim complex and another group of people as automatically kind of bad people. And I think everybody can be bullied and equally everybody can be the bully. So I think the borderline is so strict at the minute that you're either a victim or you're a bully, and crossing between that makes it really hard to kind of develop emotionally coming through school. So my question is, how far do you think anti-bullying kind of affects emotional development really, like fundamentally? And what kind of approach do you think schools can take now in terms of if you don't want to keep with the current policies that we have?
I understand what you're saying about that we want to leave things alone to a degree and allow children to become resilient, I suppose, in the sense of looking after themselves. But I think one of the questions that I've got around the bullying, the kind of strategies that are brought into schools around this, is that it seems to me that it creates a kind of tick box culture around how you might deal with the problem of bullying, and it actually removes adult authority, I suppose, and adult judgment from the situation, because I'm not sure that I think that always adults should keep away from a situation, which I might be misinterpreting you, but that's a little bit what I'm guessing from what you said. But at the same time, I think the strategies that seem to be put in place, because it is this kind of list of things that you must or mustn't do, almost removes your judgment from how you might deal with the situation.
Two questions, I think. One is, what do you do about the increase in cyberbullying? Because we're told, now this is the stuff that a lot of us never see, and it starts at a very young age. And so that's one question. How do you deal with cyberbullying? The other thing is that bullying is something that is measured by the person who is bullied, and it is whether or not it is behavior that makes someone upset or humiliated or whatever it may be. That's the starting point. You can then examine the extent to which that person is reasonable in thinking that they should be upset or humiliated by it, and you can test that. But to say, oh, just, you've got to just get more resilient, and you just got to toughen up. Some people, it depends on what point in their life you say that. Someone can say to me, come on, Andrea, toughen up. Come on, the guy didn't mean it. I mean, I work in the legal profession, so believe me, there's a lot of bullying. Very, very subtle bullying. But I can deal with it now because I'm older. But with children, there are a lot of children who aren't emotionally and intellectually capable of dealing with it. So what would you do? How would you deal with the bullying?
Helena, would you like to start on anything that strikes you as important?
Just, you asked about the definition, what is bullying, which is a very difficult question. Now, most academics would say, well, we have a very robust operational definition of bullying, which is Worldwrite's definition. And I think, it's the best definition to go with. It has to involve intentional physical or psychological harm. It has to be repetitive, and it involves an imbalance of power. Still, I think it's not an entirely objective definition, and a strong subjective element there. But bear in mind, that's the definition academics say they go with, but most of the research is not. They don't actually go with that definition because it's based on self-report questionnaires. And the definitions of bullying in the anti-bullying policies, charities and in school policies are far, far looser than that, and have included things like exclusion from friendship group. I mean, I do think that's just life. You will get on with some people and you won't get on with other people. Casual use of derogatory language. Everything that's unpleasant has been incorporated into the definition of bullying, which makes it very loose and makes it quite difficult to have a discussion about the issue. Should adults have a role? I think absolutely, I wouldn't want you to think that I'm saying adults should play no role in the raising of children. We have an important role to play in terms of teaching children about the morals and values of our society that we think they should attempt to abide by. And there may be times where adults should intervene. But we have to be very, very careful not to try to fight every battle for them, because I think we do them a disservice if we do that. And maybe we should start from the standpoint of first do no harm. It should start from the standpoint of the best thing is not to intervene, and then you've convinced yourself that you should intervene. And this point was made at the front about adult authority and trust. That's the thing that I'm really worried about in relation to anti-bullying policies. It's a tick box approach. It doesn't help children, I don't think, and it undermines adults, because adults intervene on the basis of, as I said earlier, covering their backs, not knowing the child, knowing the dynamics, working out, should I intervene here? Because there's always a chance that you intervene and you make the situation worse. You draw attention to a child, you make it more difficult for them. I'm glad that, the children who laughed at my accent, where I really wanted to fall through a hole in the ground and sometimes didn't want to carry on living because I was, took myself so seriously. I'm glad that adults didn't start pointing the finger at them and creating more of a division between me and them. First, do no harm, and you only intervene if you think you can do something to help the situation, because there's a good chance you're going to undermine their possibility of working out how to deal with it themselves.
Okay, thank you. Mike, any
Oh,
responses?
so many issues. They're all absolutely fundamental to the debate about how we go about solving this seemingly, in one sense, intractable problem. For me, what lies at the heart of this is involving young people. They are living it. We've come through the process very often. And you're right, many of us come through this process unscathed and even stronger. But the truth is, there are many, many other people who come through scarred for life. So involving young people who are right in the heart of the process is key. I've been involved in anti-bullying research and evaluating programs for many, many years, most of those 30 years. And the thing that for me stands out as most effective by a mile is something we call CATS, the cross-age teaching zone. It's where older children teach younger children, but they teach it on the basis of their own experience. And we have objective evidence that stands up to scrutiny. I would love to debate this with anybody else, but that's for another time. We have objective evidence that we can teach children about resilience. Resilience in the field of bullying, if it's about two things, it's about resilience in terms of resisting taking on the role of a victim, not seeing yourself as a victim, but seeing yourself as somebody who's empowered and able to make good choices about themselves and their own, kind of life. But it's also about empowering people to not take on the role of the bully that we sometimes don't see in terms of resilience. So involving young people in this process is absolutely key. If we do this, we'll get it wrong. If we leave it to chance, the principle of primum non nocere, first do no harm, we might help some children, but we run the risk of really leaving many of the most vulnerable youngsters within our societies to the realms of chance. Hopefully, hoping that they will become resilient and come through this. There is a middle ground. The point I made earlier on about this being a continuum of unacceptable and acceptable behaviours, it's true in terms of our response as well. We don't need to take over. That would be a mistake. It's shown to be a mistake. But what we do need to do is not leave things to chance, but wherever we can, hand over to young people. Give them the skills and the tools to become resilient. And then, when it's appropriate, as somebody mentioned earlier on, when it's appropriate, they can then run with their own independent resilience building.
Okay, thank you. Keith?
When I talked about social ecology, I think the intention in social ecology is to actually create schools that actually look at themselves and create themselves as safe and interesting and forward-looking schools. A colleague of mine in New Zealand, his principal, Mark Cleary, I remember I was in his office one day and this young man came in and he was really angry and he was really stroppy and he said, look, I've been treated really badly in this situation and it's unfair. I've been picked on. The teacher was wrong in what he did because he didn't understand this aspect of what I was, the argument that I was making. And what Mark did, rather than treating him in his anger as someone who was challenging his authority, he said, well, look, he said, you're obviously very clever, but you're actually not doing very well at school, but you have intelligence. If you use this intelligence in a positive way, then, you're actually going to go places. And this is just an example of the fact that if you have a school that's a thinking school that addresses issues like bullying in a way that's intelligent, in a way that's kind of open, in a way that you actually deal with problems as they arise, because often when people are bullies or bullied, there's lots of complexity. There's difficulties in their personal life. There are things that are going on, and you can't dismiss someone who's a bully if they're really struggling in their own life. You have to find ways to solve problems for them, the problems they're having, so that they don't need to be bullying, and kids who are struggling in other ways as well. If you create a school that's a welcoming school and where part of teacher education is actually dealing positively and addressing issues that come up for all of the children, it doesn't have to become a polarized bullying victim, observer from the side type of situation. It's actually about dealing with the issue. Of course, we all have problems, and of course, people bully. I challenge anyone here to say that they've not been a bully, that they've not been bullied, they've not been a bystander. It's part of what happens in our lives. And it's the way that schools deal with it in a more intelligent way than they do now. It's always done confrontationally. You've got people breathing down your neck, as was said, by Helene, that people purposely make sure they cover issues just so they don't get into trouble because it could be reported back. That's very, very unhealthy. And the whole thing of how you do schooling and how you do the social side of schooling as well as the academic side of schooling, because children, young people are growing up the whole time and they learn so much more from their peers, from their teachers, from the people around them. And sometimes people are really unhappy and they're not naturally bullies, but they do things that are pretty horrible. And so you have to deal with what's going on under the surface for those children, those people as well. It's a complex thing that needs to be rethought and done more positively. It doesn't have to be a yes or no situation. It's kind of, it's using your humanity, using your intelligence and creating something that's better. Okay.
So I'm going to take, I'm watching the clock, of course, another round and then come back from the panel, and I need you 1 minute at the very end to make your killer point, whatever has been said.
I think my problem with the anti-bullying policies that we've got at the moment is that I think they've gone a little bit too far. Over the course of my schooling career, my life growing up from the bottom to where I am now, which isn't really that far in, I understand that, but I've seen it progressively get more and more strict in terms of what things the schools want to clamp down on and what things that they're not going to tolerate anymore. And I think it's quite healthy for kids to deal with a lot of the things themselves. I think when you get older and when you go into workplaces, you're not always going to have someone who's above you who's going to sort things out. What if the person above you is the one who is the problem in your life? You need to understand and you need to develop the skills to sort through things with your friends and your companions and the people who are there to help you, who aren't necessarily above you in the chain of command, or the people who can just sort it out there and then. They're just there to ease you through it. I think that's quite a healthy thing because schools, the whole point of a school is to get you prepared for later life. Yep. And it's not going to happen if you get to the point in a school where somebody can go up to a teacher and say, this person said X, Y, and Z about me. Because the school just has to clamp down on you like a ton of bricks because of the policies that are set now. They're so strict. And a lot of schools just feel like you've got to go. And I've seen it happen. And most of the time, it doesn't sort out the problem. It just makes things worse because somebody who goes and tattles for such a small problem and gets such a huge reaction out of the school, it's not going to help anyone.
Thank you very much.
We're talking all the time about theory and practice. By the way, my subject is philosophy, and I'm very interested in all these connections between theory and practice and what people are actually saying. There is a concept in philosophy called phronesis. It comes from Aristotle, basically, which is practical reason, about how we think practically. I think it could be very illuminating to think about the particularities of some of these very general statements that are being made. Like Helena is making some absolutely valid points about not increasing vulnerability and letting children build up resistance. But you're talking about kind of sometimes and often, and these are kind of rather general statements. Whereas Mike gave us some very clear examples, right? Examples of children experiences that you've had. And I just want to recommend that maybe the general and the particular might go hand in hand more frequently. So when you make these general statements, which we can kind of say yes and no and but and whatever, if we have very clear examples, we're talking about children, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about parents, what actually happens in a particular room on a particular day, I think it would make some of these discussions more fruitful.
Thank you very much. A gentleman there, please.
So it's a question for Helena around paraphrasing what I think you said, Mike. So just a quick question and a quick point. I think basically at one point you sort of said that the consequences of bullying can be so bad that one person left behind, one person scarred for life. You even said one person committing suicide is so awful that really all the policy at the end of the day can be justified around avoiding that. But that's a particular type of argument. What I was going to ask Helena, what is the argument against that? Because isn't there a consequence of the impact of bullying on more broadly on society, that not to say that one suicide is ever acceptable, but there is a massive consequence if children are brought up within a world where they are scared and can't deal with bullying. So that's a question. Just that there was an issue about the continuation of minor bullying to very severe bullying. There's also a continuation of bullying from the child to the adult. An experience that I have quite regularly at work is where we have to sit down with relatively young colleagues, so colleagues between 20 and 30, and explain to them that they're not being bullied at work, they're being managed. And a lot of younger people can't understand the difference between being managed robustly, because often their behaviour needs to be robustly dealt with, and they regard it initially as bullying. And I think that is probably part of a consequence of the culture that they experience at school and at university.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. As someone who is actually about to launch a campaign to run drama workshops in schools, exploring anti-bullying, something that's really key for us is basically sort of encouraging an atmosphere of understanding and empathy amongst young people. I don't know how the panel kind of think about this, and other people, I know we kind of touch on it very slightly, but what kind of character are we building in young people that bully when we say, it's okay, I'm not going to look at you doing that because it's all part of making people resilient. What are we saying to the bullies? Like, it's okay to do that and you can keep going through life and bullying other people? Like, that's not a great way to bring up young people and encourage them to be empathetic and understanding of their peers. Okay. In my opinion.
I work in a primary school, and I have to say I normally agree with the kind of way that Spiked diagnoses trends in education, but I have to say I've never felt this culture of box ticking and the pressure of if a child says they're being bullied, you must do X, Y, Z. I've in primary school, so I wonder if that's a particular problem in secondary school. And then as to what teachers can do, which is not about subject knowledge, but to solve this problem. I think we can teach children to argue without arguing. I did my first RE lesson with my new class recently, and I said, what happens if you disagree with someone? And they said, ignore them, don't try and persuade them about my point, walk away, tell a teacher. That's what we are teaching them. So I think teachers can teach children how to have an emotional response to something where they are angry or upset, but we can give them language structures and ways of being resilient and having arguments without having bullying problems.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think there's a real link between how much adults feel that they have to intervene and protect children all the time and not allow them to be able to cope and deal with life, and bullying, and that if children are... Resilience comes from confidence, and confidence comes from being given experience, an ability to live your life and have experiences and come across things that are difficult and challenge and respond to them. So I think that part of building resilience is building confidence, and building confidence is giving children freedom. So I wonder what the panel thinks about that.
When you said that you were glad that teachers didn't intervene when people were bullying you about your accent, in a way, and you were glad that didn't happen, but then aren't you just sort of promoting that it's okay for people to exclude people with funny accents, with funny skin colour, with funny hair, who wear glasses, that it's okay for that? And if people and teachers aren't supposed to intervene, then what are they supposed to do? Are you supposed to teach them to do what?
Again, so many points. I mean, the rationale for anti-bullying policies and practices, yes, it's the extreme cases, but it's also the everyday, the mundane. We've found many examples of, we've done research over many years to show that victims of bullying, they might not take their own life, and that's only a good thing. Of course it is. But their classroom concentration, their ability to do well academically can be compromised. So that's not a few people, that's hundreds of thousands of young people across the world being negatively affected by bullying. I don't advocate cotton wool kids and that kind of approach, wrapping them up in cotton wool. Always intervening at the first sign of trouble. That's not the solution either. There's a really important principle in psychology that's got good credence based on evidence and theory, and that's stress inoculation. If we deny youngsters the opportunity to have these difficult social experiences, we deny them the opportunity to develop resilience and confidence to deal with them. It's really important that we don't wrap them up in cotton wool, but this is not a yes-no debate. This is a continuum. We need to find the right point to make, to decide where we need to do something and what that something should be. One final thing, we've spoke here about bullies and victims. There is a wealth of research to show that many young people are both bullies and victims. That one of the ways that some young people respond to being a victim of bullying is to find somebody weaker than themselves. Now, if we stood back, if we said we're going to let the children sort it out for themselves, This would do nothing other than perpetuate the problem of bullying. We do need a proportionate response.
Keith.
Yeah, just in response to Helene, if you have a situation, for instance, where a young girl or young boy is new in a class and they come in and the kids test them out, and they might do something like they might walk past the desk and knock their pencil case on the floor, and other kids laugh, and if the kid kind of stands up and says, "Pick my pencil case up," or if they kind of shrink into themselves, then you're actually sending out a message to the kids who are starting a process of bullying. And if the child doesn't, or the person doesn't actually kind of respond in any effective way, and it escalates, I don't think that experience of bullying is good if they kind of feel, if it really undermines them in their life, and if they might have challenges that they stand up to, but lots of people don't stand up to the challenges, and there has to be some kind of way of actually, dealing with these issues. I've created several programs for dealing with difficult situations like that, where you go through a process and you treat both individuals, if you're dealing with a bully and a victim, together equally. But in fact, I don't think it's. Obviously for you, because you're a strong woman, you're an interesting woman, and you've actually survived it, and it's been good for you because you said it has. But I would say for lots of people it's not the case. For lots of people it's, as you've said, it needs to be dealt with properly and effectively in the school. And my pushing of social ecology is because I think that it provides a way of actually looking at what's happening and making things work without necessarily focusing fully on bullying and response, but actually creating atmospheres where people are given help not to be bullies, where people are given help not to be victims, and where you actually kind of create good schools, and it's possible. And all this energy and money that's going into anti-bullying things could be much better used by creating, creative, useful atmospheres where teacher training is an important part of it, but supporting teachers in the schools is also.
Thank you.
Okay.
Helena.
Okay, so I think if children say or do horrible things to each other in front of an adult, you should say something. So if somebody says, "Oh, you're really fat," you say, don't talk to. How would you feel because if they're doing it in front of you and you are operating according to adults, you expect them to operate according to adult standards. That's not how we behave. That's not what I'm saying, that adults should never say anything. It's more, I think this point made over here about what a negative message it is to give children that if you have experiencing anything difficulty, it can be stamped out by somebody in authority rather than you sorting it out yourself. I know there's a lot that could be debated and it becomes quite black and white when we have so little time. On the thing about teachers, I agree. I think, I'm quite heartened by talking to teachers, and you find that often they just use human sense, common sense. But it doesn't mean that the pressure's not there, in terms of these policies. I think we should get rid of the policies and trust adults to work out when to intervene. And I just want to say something on bullycide, because I feel so strongly about this issue. I think, though, and I'm sure they don't do it for the wrong reasons, but those who are involved in anti-bullying campaigns, stop talking about bullycide. You are using the death of children and teenagers to make a point, and I think it's utterly, utterly wrong, and you should really think about the message you give to children, because I show my students a video called Bully, and it's about two children who have taken their life, one called Tyler and one called Ty, which is quite disconcerting for me with a son called Tyler, but it's terrible. The father says, "The moment I found my son hanging, I knew who killed him. They did." And he's pointing the finger at other children. It's utterly wrong. You talk about what bullies do, what some people in the anti-bullying industry do, pointing the finger at children and teenagers, blaming them for the death of another child, when actually it's often a lot more complex. And the message it gives is, I could understand that boy Tyler, he was mortified, his head was shoved in a locker once he was in the shower, his clothes were hidden when he was in the shower. I can understand that he was mortified, but think about the message that gives to another child who is like this boy Tyler in the video, that, okay, there's a way out, you can take your life, and balloons are released, and you are a saint. Do not give that message ever to children, that there's a way out. it's just the wrong message to give.
I agree with Helena. Messages to young people are really, really important. They're absolutely key. And the message to young people is, you don't have to put up with this. You don't have to take on the role of a bully or a victim. You can be strong. Us intervening to take away that decision-making process, that resilience, is nothing other than a mistake. But what we must do is keep in mind that just because we put out this message to young people, that they will assimilate it. Some of them are very vulnerable and they do need our help.
Okay, very quickly, because I've
For the young woman in the middle who's interested in drama, I did a chapter based on fieldwork for social action drama for young people in the Anti-Bullying Handbook, the second edition, and also in Bullying in Secondary Schools. You might find it interesting. So my point would be that, I don't disagree with lots of things that have been said here. I disagree with some of them, but I think the whole issue around bullying needs to be rethought, and it needs to be done creatively, and it needs to take in account that, children are bullies, they're victims, they're bystanders all of the time, and creating a healthy school in such a way that you actually have empowered adults in terms of the teachers, the parents, the general community, but also within the student population at all. I think I think bullying is a very serious problem, needs to be dealt with, but it's also part of a lot of other social dynamics, and a healthy way of dealing with schools needs to be developed. So we go beyond anti-bullying policies and deal with, providing a nice, safe environment for everyone.
And very quickly, because you...
Okay, very quickly. I think you could, from listening to some of the talk from anti-bullying campaigns, you could think that all children are nasty little brutes that are out there to destroy other people's lives. I don't think they are. They're childish. They haven't learned to become socially and emotionally more sophisticated. I think bullying is exceptionally rare, and there are times that adults should intervene. But children are clumsy. They say things that we would never say to each other. They hit each other when they don't get their way. They need to learn to become more emotionally and socially sophisticated. And I think you learn, so much of their learning is through their interactions with each other and learning from the positive and negative emotions.
Okay. Could we thank our panel?